Good afternoon. My name is Abe Haddad. I'm the chairman of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. I'd like to call the 34th annual meeting of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau to order. Welcome our board members and guests. The Research Bureau was founded more than 3 decades ago to collect facts, engage in analysis, and offer insight and ideas for exploring and addressing local public policy challenges. Worcester has benefited from our efforts to identify best practices in public finance, administration, economic development, education, and more. Our existence and longevity is a testament to the commitment of all of those here and many, many more outside of this room. To the importance of informed public policy and debate. It is my privilege to serve as chair and to work with a great team of staff and board members. We are honored to be joined by Dr. Francis Collins of the National Institutes of Health as our keynote speaker this evening. We look forward to hearing from his thoughts on the health and economic benefits of biomedical research. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for taking the time to come tonight. We begin with the business portion of the meeting. I would like to call on Dean Moskos, who served as clerk of the Research Bureau for many years, who will give the clerk's report.
Thanks, Abe. All of you should either have been emailed or received when you came in the minutes. Any corrections, comments on the minutes from the last board meeting that was held on June 4th? Seeing none, I would ask for a motion of approval.
So vote. Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Vote so voted. Thank you.
D is short and sweet. Thank you, Dee. The Research Bureau's mission is to inform the public, but also the decision makers that craft public policy. As a policymaker himself, Congressman James McGovern understands and appreciates the value of information. But there are many federal research organizations that the Congressman can turn to. The Worcester Regional Research Bureau is one of a handful of municipal public policy research organizations. It is an honor to continue to serve as that resource for central Massachusetts cities and towns. As Congressman for over 2 decades, Congressman McGovern needs no introduction. We are pleased that he has taken the time to come out of his busy schedule to provide a brief welcome to our event tonight. Welcome, Congressman James McGovern.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and out of Washington, where it is so boring right now. Somebody asked me, what's it like? You know, do I sleep at night? I said, sleep like a baby. I get up every 2 hours screaming. But I'd like to welcome you all to the 34th annual meeting of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. And I want to extend my sincere gratitude and appreciation to Chairman Abe Haddad, who is a dear friend, and Executive Director Paul Matthews, and the entire staff and board of the Research Bureau. I think this is really an incredible event that is going to happen here tonight. I also want to recognize and thank today's featured speaker, Dr. Francis Collins, the Director of the National Institutes of Health, for being with us here today. And again, let me just say about the Research Bureau that I have valued all of the incredible analysis and the ideas that you have put forward for all the years that I've been in Congress. And I think the information that you have provided us in government, as well as other business leaders, has been incredibly important to our moving the city forward. And I think everybody here would agree that in the city of Worcester, things are going in the right direction. I want to particularly thank our city manager, Ed Augustus, for his unbelievable leadership as city manager. And you know, there are lots of challenges that we face, but the Bureau can always be counted on to give us ideas and analysis, and again, it's something we should all value. And you didn't come to hear me speak tonight, but I do want to just say a couple of words about our special guest, Dr. Collins, who will speak in just a little bit. I'm grateful that he's here today in Worcester. I'm grateful for all that he has done for Worcester and for Massachusetts. He is a visionary director of the NIH. He has led NIH forward during a challenging era when Congress wasn't always there with the necessary funding, and he has continued to think big and tackle some of the most pressing challenges facing America today. And his visit is particularly meaningful because of the close connection between Massachusetts and NIH. we received the second most funding out of any state from NIH. And we received the most funding per capita of any state. Don't tell anybody outside of this state, but just to let you know how vitally important it is to research and to our economy here. And right here in Worcester, we received hundreds of awards totaling over $200 million last year alone. And we were at UMass Medical School a little bit earlier, meeting with some really brilliant researchers and PhD candidates and post-PhD candidates. And UMass received the second most funding from Massachusetts education or research in 2018, only behind Harvard. And we're going to try to beat Harvard in the next time around. I point that out simply because when you think of the National Institutes of Health, they're more than abstract institutes located near Washington, D.C. It is vital to what happens here in Worcester County and in Massachusetts. The incredible research, the life-saving research that goes on is funded by NIH. There would be no medical school here. There'd be no a cluster of biotech companies here without NIH's funding and support over the years. So, you know, when you think about some of the most important people in this country and the most important organizations in the country, I can't think of anybody more important to this economy and to our healthcare system in this area than Dr. Francis Collins and the NIH. And let me just say one final thing on a personal note. I think Francis Collins is a great man. The work that he has done in the medical sciences is unbelievable. And he's always thinking out of the box. We had a great conversation about nutrition and the importance of bringing the studies of nutrition more into our healthcare sciences. But he and his wife Diane have been treasured friends to me and my wife Lisa for quite a while, and we can't thank him enough for all he has done for us over the years. So he's not only a great man, but more importantly, he's a very, very good man. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you, and I know this will be an interesting discussion, but thank you for being here, and Dr. Collins, thank you for coming to Worcester.
You're taller than me, Jim. Thank you, Congressman, for your tireless efforts on behalf of Worcester and your ongoing support of the work of the Research Bureau. I'd like to now introduce Paul Kelly, Regional President of the Berkshire Bank, a longtime supporter of Worcester, an incoming member of the Research Bureau's Executive Committee, who will offer greetings.
Thanks, Abe. We at Commerce Bank, a division of Berkshire Bank, are proud to be strong supporters of the Research Bureau. We appreciate the fact that the Research Bureau serves the public interest of Greater Worcester by conducting independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of public policy issues to promote informed public debates and decision-making. We appreciate all individuals and organizations that support the Research Bureau and call others to contribute to this great organization. Most importantly, I also want to welcome the new Executive Director of the Research Bureau, Paul Matthews, a local Worcester resident. Spent years in politics, public policy, public affairs, and most recently at the 495 Metro West Corridor Partnership. He and his staff, Eric Nealon, right? Eric's out there with Tom Quinn, incredible advocates for this community. It's also an honor to be up here with such great leaders as Congressman McGovern, Dr. Collins, and Abe. Commerce Bank's a $14 billion bank with over 130 branches in the Northeast and has similarities with these great leaders. Dr. Abe's a friend, chairman of the board of the Research Bureau, a prolific volunteer in the community, organizations like MBI, Worcester Business Development Corp, Worcester Economic. Like Abe, Commerce Bank is a philanthropic bank that invests over $4 million in not-for-profits with some local names such as the Worcester Community Action Council, Maine South Boys and Girls Club, Habitat for Humanities. In addition, we support local redevelopment efforts such as Hanover, Black Box, Commerce Bank Field, and some of the activities in the Canal District. In addition, sponsorships, we're proud our employees have employee volunteerism throughout the year. the bank has this extraordinary day where all employees in the organization take the day off to work in the community. This year, the team built beds for the Mass Coalition of Homeless and Playhouse of Veterans. Dr. Collins, who discovered the genes associated with a number of diseases and led to the Human Genome Project, which you'll talk about today. Like Dr. Collins, Commerce discovered the secret of delivering world-class banking services through its commercial lending staff, private banking, My Bankers, and 16 local retail locations. As you can see, I'm weaving this through. Congressman Jim McGovern, Worcester native that helps people fight for fairness, decency, and respect for all citizens and seeks to give back to the community. Like the Congressman's team, Commerce Bank has an amazing team of professionals here today to help you manage and protect your cash, lend money, protect your business from loss, and provide great returns from our private banking, wealth, and deposit programs. We say, life is exciting, let us help. If you like the idea of doing business locally with people who are vested here, that has experience and capabilities, let us help you. And when you bank with Berkshire, you should feel that you also give back to the local communities. Again, we at Commerce Bank, a division of Berkshire, want to thank Paul Matthews, the research group, for the commitment to the community, and look forward to hearing from Dr. Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We at the Research Bureau are truly grateful for Berkshire Bank's ongoing commitment to both the Research Bureau and the Worcester community. By picking up the mantle of Commerce Bank, your team recognized how a strong community means a strong bank. We honor their dedication and generosity. I'd like now to introduce John Spillane, Chair of the Nominating Committee, former Chair of the Research Bureau, and a partner at Spillane & Spillane for the Nominating Committee report.
Thank you, Dr. Haddad, and greetings to all. It's my pleasure to give you the report of the nominating committee for this year. On the screen, we have those who have not been nominated to serve as officers for a one-year term. The chair would be Deborah Penta, vice chair Francis Madigan III, treasurer George W. Tetler III, clerk of the corporation would be D.M. Moskis, Esquire, the Vice President for Finance, Richard Powell, and the Assistant Clerk, Michael Moraine. Also serving on the Executive Committee, elected to a 3-year term, Abraham Haddad, Paul Kelly, Eric Torkanu, Janice Yost, Sue Mailman, Todd Rodman, and John Spillane. The Board of Directors for a 3-year term, joining the board would be Stephen Knox, Lisa Olson, Lisa Perrin, and Sherry Pitcher. And then you will see on the screen renewals for the Board of Directors for a 3-year term, 2-year term, and a 1-year term. And before we get to recognition of who's rotating off, a motion. The slate. Second. Okay, second. All those in favor, opposed, and another motion?
Motion for the clerk to cast one single ballot in favor of the slate.
Second to that? Okay, all those in favor? All right. The slate is elected as presented. Thank you. And we do want to give special recognition to those who are rotating off of the Executive Committee. Special recognition to Brian Thompson, who's with us in the front row, former President and CEO of Commerce Bank, and also Karen Duffy, who I had the pleasure of serving as the Vice Chair of this organization. Karen was Chair, and so Karen is rotating off the Executive Committee. We appreciate their outstanding efforts to this organization. We also want to recognize those directors who are rotating off, and that's Roberta Bryan, Karen Duffy, Tarika Salway, Lisa Kirby Gibbs, Ann Sawyer, Nick Smith, and Brian Thompson. So I just want to acknowledge them for their service to the organization, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Welcome and congratulations to our new board and executive committee members. We look forward to working with you. I'd like to just start with some remarks of my own. Thank you very much for being part of today's historic address by Dr. Collins, the Director of the National Institutes of Health. NIH is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, and over the past 5 years, NIH awards in Worcester have increased for an aggregate of $786 million. This is in part the culmination of long-standing work by Worcester leaders initiated by the Worcester Area Chamber of Commerce to help build our community into a life science powerhouse. Growth of this cluster was based on 4 fundamental elements: updated research, NIH audiences, entrepreneurial capacity for the biotech park, workforce development, and an innovation center for technology transfer. This foundation has built a strong and ongoing record of success, such as the leadership of the University of Mass Medical School as the top NIH recipient, growing research activities at WPI, Clark, Tufts, the Vet School, Assumption, and other local academic institutions. Increased biomanufacturing capacity led by the Worcester Business Development Corporation is ongoing, and expanded NIH support for NIH, by NIH for life sciences and R&D. Having assisted with this progress over the course of many years, the Bureau is proud to host Dr. Collins today. Thank you to Congressman McGovern for his work bringing Dr. Collins to Worcester. This continues a long and proud tradition of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau in posting visionary leaders to address our community. 2 years ago, Secretary of Education James Pizer spoke to us to provide a state context for the imminent proposed strategic plan for Worcester Public Schools. Last year, the then president of Babson College, Kerry Healy, informed and reinforced the value of diverse leadership in academia, business, government, and the community. Her address was timely, poignant, and meaningful on the importance of gender equity and diversity. Since then, the Bureau has continued to provide thoughtful research and analysis on important public policy issues. As noted in our annual report before you today, all of these accomplishments were achieved while the Bureau was undergoing a transition to only our 3rd executive director in 34 years. The Bureau's loss of Tim McGuarty as executive director was the Commonwealth's gain, as Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito have appointed him to serve as the state's Deputy Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. With his departure, the Bureau embarked on a search for our 3rd executive director to find the best candidate who understood the need, value, and use of objective research. As the executive committee met, we felt it was crucial to conduct the search deliberately rather than quickly, which was possible due to the committed and hard-working Bureau staff, Eric Nealon, Tom Quinn, and Mary Beth Burke. In the end, the executive committee voted unanimously that we had found the right candidate with the right qualifications and the right record of accomplishment in Paul Matthews. He has worked with the Worcester's municipal research government, our legislative delegation, and community leaders. First as Harriet Chandler's Chief of Staff, then at the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. For the past 15 years, he has served as the Executive Director of the 495 Metro West Partnership, where he worked with 35 communities, employers, municipal officials, higher education, Chamber of Commerce developers, and other stakeholders on a wide range of policy issues. Beyond his extensive professional qualifications, Paul is a lifelong Worcester resident, has been active in a wide range of community organizations, is a proud graduate of the Worcester Public Schools, and has 2 children attending Worcester Public Schools. Under his leadership, the Bureau is poised to build on its record of accomplishment, while Worcester is poised for even greater success. Now we welcome for the first time Paul Matthews, the newly appointed Executive Director of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau.
Thank you very much, Abe, both for that very generous introduction, this opportunity, and your leadership as chair over this past 2-year period. As the Worcester Regional Research Bureau celebrates its 34th annual meeting today, we are reminded it was founded to serve the public interest of Greater Worcester by conducting independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of public policy issues to promote informed public debate and decision-making. The organization continues to protect public interest by identifying issues, investigating impacts, and educating the public and government officials on opportunities as well as best practices. The Bureau had another very strong year leading to this historic annual meeting, which has been made possible by our very generous sponsors. Due to their support, we have over 400 attendees today, a near historic high, I'm told. And our presenting sponsor, we want to thank Commerce Bank, as you heard, a division of Berkshire Bank, and particularly thank Paul Kelly for his very kind words and for coming on our executive committee. We also have sponsorships on the leadership level from AbbVie and Lisa Olson, and the University of Massachusetts Medical School, represented by our own Dr. Collins, Michael Collins rather than Francis, but leadership must run in the Collins family. We also want to thank MBI and John Weaver. Those of you who had time to see the posters outside on NIH grant recipients across the region, that's due to John's very hard work. And it provides a real testimonial to the value of NIH within our community. We also want to thank the DCU Center. Sandy Dunn, Jim Moen, and their staff have done a tremendous job, particularly given the fact the Bureau is such a small staff ourselves. We want to thank all of you. You really represent all walks of life in Worcester. There are undergraduate students here, medical residents, researchers, entrepreneurs, community leaders, business executives, and government officials. But beyond all of you and today's supporters, we have support, and we're very fortunate all year round. So we'd like to express our gratitude to our board and executive committee leaders, a literal who's who of leaders across Worcester who provide critical leadership and support to the Bureau and have for 34 years. We also, at the Bureau, want to express our gratitude to my predecessors, the former executive directors. While Tim McGorthy was unable to join us today, we are joined by Roberta Schaefer. We want to thank you both for your service to the Bureau and the region, and for your friendship, wise counsel, and continued support of the Bureau. While the Bureau has had too many distinguished staff to thank by name, we really need to thank our current staff, Director of Programs and Operations Eric Nealand, Research Associate Tom Quinn, and Mary Beth Burke, who came in off the bench to literally work this event. Can't thank her enough. Our founders back in 1985 saw the need for this nonpartisan, objective source of policy research and established the Bureau. Given other cities of our size don't have the benefits of a bureau, they were remarkably visionary. But even more astoundingly, all three signatories to our Articles of Incorporation are closely involved with the Bureau today. George Tetler, our treasurer, Dee Moskis, you heard from our clerk, and Flip Morgan, who I met with 2 weeks ago and provides steady support and leadership. We are also fortunate to have a wide range of support from corporations, foundations, nonprofits, and individuals in Worcester and around the region. Far too many to name them all. But we need to mention Polar Beverages, Hanover Insurance, Massport and Worcester Regional Airport, Fallon Health, and Country Bank. And there are 3 contributors of in-kind services that make the Bureau staff lives much easier. Deborah Penta and her team at Penta Communications provide unparalleled marketing in our website, including all the meeting materials today. Rick Powell and his team at Greenberg, Rosenblatt, Cullen, Bizzoli literally make sure we get paid, as well as provide accounting services for the Bureau that are invaluable given our small size. And of course, the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, our media sponsor. But please take a moment to look at the annual report, because the list of sponsors and supporters is far longer, though I would note there's always room to add more names, so please see me. Due to their support and leadership, the Bureau continued to provide key contributions to the community by conducting independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of issues to inform public debate and government decision-making. In fact, since our inception, the Bureau has produced 245 reports and presented 239 programs to benefit the greater Worcester region. Just this year, our reports included the 5th year of our Worcester Almanac, an aggregation of key economic data, breaking down the budget, providing key background on the municipal and school department budgets and operating costs, questions for the candidates, an encapsulation of the challenges facing Worcester's next mayor, city council, and school committee, March Municipal Madness, an innovative solicitation of public input on city funding and operational priorities, a brief on Chapter 70 reform. This provided key local context to legislation that's currently moving in the State House that affects educational funding, the implications of a fair, free WRTA, raising potential models to support the RTA and boost ridership, including subsidizing particular routes, choosing a better voting system, a timely examination of alternative voting methods, such as Maine's adoption of ranked choice voting, opportunity zones. We provided key mapping and demographic resources on each of the city's opportunity zones for use by developers in the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, and a brief on the Worcester Housing Authority, which examined the state of the city's public housing. Events and programs include, as always, our Thomas Green Public Leadership Awards. As always, we celebrated exemplary municipal employees, not only from Worcester, but from other regional communities. Smart Cities brought experts on technology here to Worcester to discuss potential applications for municipalities of all sizes. We are currently in the midst of our municipal candidate forums for mayor, school committee, and city council, with our partners from the Worcester Regional Chamber, Worcester Telegram and Gazette, and Mechanics Hall to boost civic engagement. And Buck Bus, an innovative game show, literally on a WRTA bus, to boost awareness of Worcester and the importance of transit. All of these reports, resources, and programs build on the long history of the Bureau's accomplishments, highlighting both Greater Worcester's opportunities and challenges for the public and policymakers. And the city is now in the midst, as we all know, of a transformational stage of developments. Past public investments, such as the convention center we're in today, as well as the medical school, Worcester Airport, commuter rail, and Union Station, have resulted in key private sector investment, catalyzed by the leadership of City Manager Ed Augustus, the mayor, city council, city staff, Worcester Redevelopment Authority, Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, and our other business, educational, and community leaders. To exemplify this new era in Worcester, Polar Park, which is now under construction, is frequently cited, but there are a lot of other just as important changes. There's expanded downtown presence and population, including 2/3 of the Bureau staff. My colleagues Eric and Tom actually live downtown. Expanded capacity for biomanufacturing, thanks to the city, NBI, WBDC, and state support. Expanded commuter rail with heart-to-hub express service. State-of-the-art Worcester Technical High School, providing cutting-edge educational programs. While we should and can celebrate all these accomplishments, there are still ongoing challenges that depend upon informed collective leadership within government, the private sector, nonprofits, academia, and other key constituencies like neighborhood groups. Just a few challenges include, as was illustrated in the state's recent congestion report, Worcester has as much of a problem with congestion as Boston, and is a draw to commuters from all regions. And that results in congestion not only in state highways, but also on city streets. Our commuter rail service is much improved, but the state is currently engaged in the next evolution of service with new potential operating models that could benefit the city of Worcester and our line. Our municipal government benefits from strong professional leadership, and due to a historic high in the number of at-large city council candidates, but extremely low turnout in the preliminary election. Our school system has enormous interest in the school committee race, while the strategic plan is in an implementation phase, and on the state level, significant changes are moving forward to state funding for education, including the city of Worcester. To address these and other challenges, the Bureau will continue providing independent, nonpartisan research and analysis on the policy issues to inform our public and policymakers. Today illustrates the value of that role, since the program and our guest speaker, Dr. Collins, were developed specifically to showcase a growing opportunity for Greater Worcester. Beyond his own historic scientific accomplishments on genetics, which I'm sure Dr. Collins will not mention due to his modesty, he has had a huge impact as a director at the National Institutes of Health, providing crucial funding to many of our universities, life science companies, and medical institutions. In the year ahead, the Bureau will continue providing such thought-provoking speakers and research to help inform and stimulate debate on these important issues that impact our region. We know that our work is strong because of the tremendous support of everyone in this room, as well as our executive committee and board, local civic and business leaders who have a strong pulse on our region and care deeply about the needs of Worcester, its government, and its community. As has been the case for the last 34 years, the Worcester Regional Research Bureau will stay focused on new challenges while identifying opportunities facing our community. As we move forward in this next phase of Worcester's renaissance, the Bureau will continue to do whatever we can, whenever we can, to inform and educate the public and policymaker on these issues. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you, Dr. Collins.
He threw me off with the length of his presentation, sorry. Thank you, Paul. A wonderful introduction to your tenure as our new CEO. We appreciate you being here. We are now pleased to introduce Lisa Olson, Vice President for Immunology Research and the head of AbbVie's Worcester operations since 2012. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Dr. Olson as a member of the Massachusetts Biomedical Initiatives Board. She offers a unique understanding of both science and business, developed during a career that has included work for such organizations as Monsanto, Pfizer, and Abbott Laboratories. Dr. Olson has published over 30 peer-reviewed articles in journals and has authored 6 patents. We are grateful that under her leadership and as a result of her commitment to data-driven outcomes, AbbVie has become a lead supporter of the Research Bureau's efforts as well as in community-wide initiatives in education, healthcare, and the arts. Dr. Olson will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Abe. And it's really a pleasure to welcome Dr. Collins to Worcester. I think you've heard, and I can attest to it, that not only does Worcester have a very dynamic academic presence, but has a very strong growing biotech presence that we're really nurturing here. And I think it's incredibly appropriate that today the Research Bureau has Dr. Collins as its speaker. So Dr. Collins holds a PhD in physical chemistry from Yale and an MD earned at the University of North Carolina. And when I was thinking about that and what he has done with his career since then, it really made sense because I think he's put together a very unique combination of a very reductive science, PChem, with a very systems biology science, clinical medicine. And in fact, combining those two disciplines has been the hallmark of his career from the beginning, where he focused on genetics and genomics and the linkage of genetics to disease. In fact, it's led to his well-deserved, I would say, description as one of the greatest physician geneticists of our time. When he was at the University of Michigan, yay Midwest, he led the International Human Genome Project, which in 2003 published the first human genome and a DNA instruction book of how to understand that. We know now, I mean, since 2003 to now, so what's that, 16 years later, you can just take a swab of your cheek and send it off to one of these companies, and for $100 you can get your genome sequenced. He served following that as the director of the National Human Genome Research Center for many years, continuing his work on the linkage of genetics to disease. And in 2009, he was asked by President Obama to lead the National Institutes of Health, which he has done since that time, weathering the last 10 years of intense scrutiny on biomedical research and actually a change of administration, which is pretty amazing. So you've heard a lot about him being the head of the NIH. I think as a scientist, what's very humbling is the National Institutes of Health is the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world. The United States leads that, and Dr. Collins is the steward of that funding and the scope of that research, which really ranges from very basic research all the way up to clinical research. And I'm very pleased as a U.S. scientist to have him at the helm. With his career, he's won numerous awards. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine. He's won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the list goes on and on. So I first met Dr. Collins, something of course I remember, I'm not sure he remembers, but I remember that I met him in 2014 in Washington, D.C. at the inaugural opening of an unprecedented project that combined the public and private sector with a focus on molecularly defining disease in a new way. And that project was called the Accelerated Medicines Partnership. It really brought together drug hunters like myself with academic researchers and the foundation of NIH. And what we strove to do was trying to get a deeper understanding of disease in a way that had never been done before by using the new cutting-edge technologies that are available now and going after actually inflamed tissue instead of the more easily acquired blood of human patients. In our case, AbbVie Immunology was involved in the research of both rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, with the hope that understanding disease more thoroughly that way would allow us to build more effective and better therapeutic molecules. Dr. Collins was the driver of that, to bring people from the private sector into the public sector and have everybody work together is something that's number one, not easy, and two, I don't think would ever have happened without a visionary leader saying this is what we need to do for human medicine for the future. I'm very pleased 6 years later to say that that data is actually coming back, and I can personally attest that some of the information that we've gotten from our AMP collaboration is informing the generation of new therapeutics for those two diseases right here in Worcester. So Dr. Collins is going to talk to us today about the exceptional opportunities in biomedical research, and I ask you to please join me in welcoming this scientific visionary.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olson, for those kind remarks, and thanks to all of those who've preceded me at this podium with kind remarks about NIH and its contribution to this part of the country, which I certainly agree has been a wonderful partnership. And so it's really a privilege to be able to be here speaking to the Worcester Regional Research Bureau about ways in which I think the future may hold even greater opportunities for the exciting science that we now see closely coming upon us. And the main thing I want to share with you is some little visionary ideas, which I hope you'll find interesting, about exactly how this is going to be taking shape over the course of the next few years. I don't want to go on any further, though, without expressing my sincere thanks and gratitude and appreciation to Congressman McGovern, who has become just a wonderful friend, both personally and as he mentioned, his wife Lisa and my wife Diane are quite good buddies, and it's been wonderful to have that part of our ability to get to know each other. But he's also a remarkable leader in the United States Congress. I would refer to him not as Congressman, but as Mr. Chairman, because as chair of the House Rules Committee, a position which reflects the way in which his colleagues see him as a true leader. He has enormous influence on exactly what kinds of things can get done in the Congress, which is always a challenge, especially right now, getting things done. And this is a true public servant. He is not a show horse. This is somebody who's really trying to do the right thing for our country, and I greatly appreciate the chance when I have the opportunities I have today to talk with him about some of that visionary set of ideas of where medical research might go. So thank you for the invitation, and wonderful to be able to spend time with you here today. I had a wonderful time earlier today over at UMass at the Medical Center, meeting with some of the leaders of the institution, and also having a chance to meet with students, graduate students, MD, PhD students. The future, that's what they are. And it was indeed inspiring to see the energy and the vision that they represent. And this is a golden era for medical research, so I was glad to see them rising to that occasion with great enthusiasm. So yes, I want to talk to you about exceptional opportunities in biomedical research. A little background first, because I guess not everybody in the room knows exactly what NIH is all about. We are, I think, the steward of medical and bio and behavioral research for the United States. I think of myself as somebody who tries to live up to that model of stewardship. The Congress gives us substantial resources, currently $39 billion a year. And we pursue science on a fundamental basis. This is the basic science part of what we do. But also we seek to apply that in collaboration with the private sector to identify ways in which this can extend healthy life and reduce illness and disability. Pretty simple mission statement, but it's also a powerful and noble one. It makes it easy to wake up in the morning and feel like you're spending your time well. We are the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world, as you heard. We do have research in our own laboratories in Bethesda, Maryland, our so-called intramural program. You see a picture of part of the campus there. But most of our resources, 82 or 83% of it, goes out to institutions all over the country and some outside the country where the great science that we want to see happen goes forward. And certainly UMass is a wonderful example of that kind of industry and exciting outcome. We help train the next generation by supporting training grants. We do foster communication of medical information. We are one of the places that people go to when they're looking for facts, and we're proud of that. We think we're pretty good at this. 158 supported researchers have become Nobel laureates, including Craig Mello, who's here, of course, in Worcester. And of course, we just had Nobel Prizes, so I have to brag about this. This was just Monday when the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to the three gentlemen you see here, and two of them are long-term grantees of the National Institutes of Health, supporting their work on oxygen sensing, which is a lovely story. It was wonderful to see the way in which the Nobel Prize Committee selected this particular topic this year. So yeah, we always look forward to the first week in October and claim credit for whatever happens, and we're doing it again. And of course, as I said, we fund scientists across the US. Here the color coding tells you the proportionality of funding. You've already heard that as a per capita investment. Massachusetts is number one. The total dollars, California's got you slightly beat, but they got a lot more people, so what would you think? And again, for the state, $2.9 billion in this current congressional district, and much of this is at UMass, but also some other places around here, $202.5 million. And we think every penny of that has been a really good investment, and look forward to the way in which this part of the world continues to be incredibly competitive for those resources. And we're grateful to the Congress that over the course of the last 4 years, the funding for NIH has gone up by 30%, even at a time where many other aspects of government funding are under stress. There is bipartisan agreement in both houses that this is one of the things the government does that's really worthwhile. And I can quote you the return on investment numbers if you're interested. $8.38 of economic growth for every dollar that NIH invests in grants over the course of 7 or 8 years. And that's a pretty darn good ROI. So even if you didn't care about the fact it's curing diseases and improving your health, it's also good for the economy. What's not to love here? And the impact on health, you could measure in various ways. Certainly if you look over the longer term, as this graph shows you, longevity has been improving since 1970, although I have to say that has started to level off and even drop back a little bit because of two things, one being obesity and the other being the opioid epidemic. But if you look at what's happened with specific diseases, deaths from heart attack dropped by more than 70% in the last 60 years, and that's a direct consequence of research in places like Framingham, Massachusetts, I might mention, since I just drove past them today. Cancer death rates are coming down about 1% per year across the board, and that's been true now for about a quarter century. So cancer death rates down by 26%, and in some instances, much more than that. Look at where we are with leukemias, look where we are with melanoma, which used to be a death sentence if it spread beyond the original lesion, and where now long-term survival and even cure is almost commonplace. And look at HIV. Those of you who have been around a while, looking across this room, there were people who knew what was happening in 1988 and 89, where a diagnosis of being HIV positive was a death sentence. You might make it for a year, you might make it 18 months, but you weren't going to make it longer than that. And now, if you're diagnosed with HIV and you have access to antiretrovirals, you can look forward to essentially a normal lifespan. And that is an astounding thing to be able to say. And that was a dramatic example of how NIH, working with partners in industry, put the foot down on the accelerator and came up with strategies that are now dramatically successful, even to the point where we now are talking about ending HIV/AIDS in the US by a combination of strategies that can also achieve the kind of prevention that we need. I mentioned the economic value, and I'll mention it again, 433,000 high-quality jobs, $74 billion in new economic activity, this $8.38, my favorite number. The fact that this is going up after 3 years. The Genome Project, which I was happy to serve as the leader of for those 13 years, has had an economic analysis also. It cost the US government over those 13 years a total of $3.8 billion, and we finished ahead of schedule, and that was actually less than what was expected. People have gone back to look at what the actual economic growth is from that. It's about $1 trillion, and it's continuing to go up. So yeah, it's a 178-fold return on investment. Not bad. Well, okay, let's look to the future, though. I'm telling you about stuff in the past, so of course we have to have a DeLorean here. We're going to see what we can look forward to that's coming along. And while I'm saying this is traveling into the future, some of the stuff I'll tell you about is actually here now. It may not be fully developed, it may not be fully tested in multiple spaces, but these are things that are happening that I did not expect would happen in my lifetime. And so I'm going to pick 10 of them that over the course of the next 10 years I think are going to be pretty dramatic. And for a place like Worcester, with the remarkable ecosystem you have right here, between a very strong academic institution and very strong biotech, these are areas I'm sure that you will be playing a role and are already investing in and might even think about investing more. 10 advances in 10 years. Well, one of them is this ability to be able to do biology not on large chunks of tissue or zillions of cells growing in a plate, but one cell at a time. Think about that. The basic unit of life is the cell. Until about 4 or 5 years ago, we were very limited in our ability to look at individual cells. We had to look at very large numbers because we didn't have sensitive enough methods. That has all changed. And particularly now, you can take an individual cell and ask it what it's doing by which genes are on or off, by looking at the RNA that's being put forward from that genome, which is a way of telling you what the cell is doing. This is pretty breathtaking, which means that you can take individual tissues, and I didn't know Dr. Olson was going to mention this very example in her introduction, but I will now put it up here. This is rheumatoid arthritis. This is from the AMP program, the Accelerating Medicines Partnership that you heard about. I can't go through all the details, but each one of the colored dots is an individual cell. If you look at that diagram on the right half of this, that is a display which has been done by computer to tell you which cells are similar and which are different. So the cells that have the same color and are sort of close together are like each other, and the ones that are different are different. And what that's telling you is that in the joint of somebody with rheumatoid arthritis, where you've done a biopsy, there's a lot going on we never knew about before. Because in the past, you might have done that biopsy and you'd get one measurement, which is sort of an average of everything that's there. And now you can ask each cell, what are you doing? And there's some pretty profound findings here. The cells that I always thought were the most boring, the fibroblasts, the lining fibroblasts that you see there in blue, turn out to be profoundly important in pathogenesis of this disease and have given a lot of new ideas about therapeutics. So all of this is just happening because we can look one cell at a time. We now have a project that NIH has supported to try to do that for the brain, because that's a pretty complicated and important organ, as well as lots of other human tissues. And all that data is made accessible to everybody in a public database so everybody can learn from it. And this is a revolution. It's basic science, but it will be a foundation that changes our understanding profoundly of human biology. So yes, and in this case, we're talking about rheumatoid arthritis, which you can see does terrible things to joints, and we do need new ideas about what to do about this. And again, it's been wonderful having the companies engaged in this, working with us, including AbbVie, which has been a wonderful partner. A second, mostly sort of basic science, but with profound consequences, is to understand the human brain in lots of other ways. It's pretty bold to talk about being able to understand the human brain. You have 86 billion neurons between your ears, and each one of those has, on the average, 1,000 connections. So this is like a system that is more complicated than anything else in the known universe, and we aim to try to understand it. Some people have worried our brains were not complicated enough to understand our brains. So we're going to need some computer assistance here. But we're on the path to do that by developing a whole set of new technologies that allow you not just to look in a static way at what the brain is doing, but in a dynamic way. What are the circuits doing when you are interpreting incoming information, or when you're initiating some kind of voluntary muscle movement, or when you're laying down a memory and then retrieving it? We're just bold enough to think we can figure that out, and maybe in the course even of the next decade or less. So the Brain Initiative is aiming to do that. Here's one of those technologies that's giving us an opportunity. In this case, this is a mouse brain at very high resolution to see, and this can be scaled to look at large parts of the brain. Each one of the images that you see there is showing you particular axons and dendrites, right down to the level of being able to see the little dendrites with their various bulbs on there that are basically giving you the neuroscience connections that everybody has been looking for. It's kind of visually appealing. See that big cell body there? This is the level of complexity we're talking about. So yeah, imagine 86 billion of those and trying to figure out how they work. Well, it's a big task. But we have been putting now, for the course of the last 5 years, major investments into this, and I would say we're ahead of where I thought we would be at this point. So, of course, this isn't just about basic science. It's also about figuring out how we can use that information to get a better handle on conditions like autism and schizophrenia and Parkinson's, autism, neurological conditions, and particularly Alzheimer's disease, because we really need better ways to understand this condition. So this is another big task for the next 10 years. We have made a lot of progress in Alzheimer's in terms of being able to characterize what is happening in the brain. We have not yet gotten to the point where we have a pharmacological intervention that we're convinced is slowing the progress. But I'll tell you, there's an awful lot of trials. We're running about 30 of them right now. And we're getting into a much more interesting space here, where it's not focused solely on the amyloid hypothesis, but many other potential targets as well. And again, this is another example of working with the private sector. There's another accelerated medicine partnership that's working on Alzheimer's. And lots of interesting ways that this can be looked at using what you might call as systems biology. And the fourth example, and one that I think was unanticipated until a little over 10 years ago, when Shinya Yamanaka blew us all away by showing that, in fact, you could take a mature skin cell and you could add just 4 specific genes to it, and you could convince it to essentially go back in time and become pluripotent, capable of becoming any type of cell that your body might need. This seemed so counterintuitive to what everybody thought was revealed wisdom about the irreversibility of cell differentiation, and yet it turned out to be reversible if you knew what to do. And once you've made one of those iPS cells, which I could make from any of you if I had a piece of your skin and I could convince the cells in the skin to do the right thing, then you could convince those cells to become something else, like a heart muscle cell or a nerve cell, or if you're diabetic, maybe a pancreatic beta cell. So this whole ability to develop insights into human biology and ultimately therapeutics has revolutionized a whole field of what we now call regenerative medicine. We can put those cells onto chips, and we're doing that in an interesting way. And sometimes you can even hook those chips up so they talk to each other. And this is a cartoon, but there's actually a version of this that works pretty well, where you have on a chip cells from a particular person who's still walking around, because this was just started with a skin biopsy, and then all of these cell types were created by appropriate cocktails. And then if you wanted to find out whether that person would respond well or have a toxic reaction to a particular drug, well, don't give the drug to the person, give it to the chip and see what the chips tell you about the response. This is a dramatic advance, and that ultimately maybe you will be on a chip too. We will all be on a chip, just so that you have a chance to find out before there's some intervention whether it's going to work for you or not. Another one, which we heard about today at the University of Massachusetts, was the microbiome, because here in Worcester today was none other than Jeff Gordon, who's been one of the major leaders in this field. We need to really rethink our concept of what self is, because the more we learn about the microbes that live on us and in us, well, first of all, they got us outnumbered as far as the number of cells. And secondly, they clearly play a really important role in our health. They can help us stay healthy, or they can make us sick. We, until recently, didn't know enough about that to really say with much confidence what was going on, because most of those microbes you can't actually grow in the laboratory, but they have DNA or RNA. They have nucleic acid, because that's what all living things do. Viruses do too. So now, with DNA sequencing coming out of the Genome Project and now being incredibly rapid and cheap, you can take an inventory of what's there in the GI tract or on the skin or in the mouth, and you can begin to understand what happens to people who are healthy and what happens when you get sick. We invested heavily in this in the course of the last decade or so, and now there's vast databases of what the normal microbiome looks like and what happens when illness strikes. And that is, in fact, reflected by this timeline that you see here, which has led to all kinds of interesting insights for conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, but also for things you might not have expected, like diabetes or malnutrition. Jeff Gordon's presentation today was all about studying the microbiome in malnourished kids in underdeveloped countries, and figuring out that you can't necessarily help a child who's starving in Bangladesh just by giving the standard kind of nutrition. You also need to worry about replacing the microbes in the gut so that they end up with the proper balance. So yes, our self has to now include our microbiome. We are a superorganism. And here are some examples. Here's a little bit of an advertisement here. That I write a blog. You all read it, right? Every Tuesday, every Thursday, I pick something out of the medical literature that's just come out, and I write what I hope is an accessible version of that that would inspire people who haven't been tracking that to get interested. And here's just a few of the recent blogs. If you just go to nih.gov and look for the director's page, you'll see the director's blog, and you can sign up for this. Okay, number 6. You had your flu shot yet? Good, I heard at least one yes. It's time. But why do we have to do this every year? Why can't we come up with a vaccine that basically just works and you're done? Well, you know why. It's because the virus changes its coat. Every year we have a new one to deal with because it's highly mutable. And that is a pain, and you certainly would recognize that we don't always get it right when we try to guess which flu virus is going to be the dominant one. And every year we hope we get the guess right. We'll see what happens this year. More of concern is the potential for a really serious worldwide pandemic of a highly infectious flu like what happened in 1918. And we are not at all free of that risk. In fact, we're a little overdue for something to come bursting out of somewhere, maybe Southeast Asia, which would turn out to be highly infectious and highly inducing of serious morbidity and even mortality. 50 million people died in 1918 of the flu. This could happen next year. So what we really need is a vaccine that would work against that too. So what could we do about that? Well, what you see on this diagram of the virus, it's coated with these proteins, which look like mushrooms with a stalk and a cap. And it turns out that the head and the stem are different in terms of their variability. It's the head that changes from year to year. If we blow that up now and look at it sideways, that's the head. And every place that's red there shows you a place that varies from one year to the next. So you can see why your immunity doesn't work very well with all those changes that are happening. But the stem doesn't change much at all. It can't, otherwise the whole thing falls apart. If we could make an antibody against the stem, that ought to work for all influenzas, including last year's and next year's, and also that pandemic we're worried about. Well, that's the effort here, is to try to see if we could convince the immune system to recognize the stem. It goes after the head because that's what's waving at it. So we need to distract it and provide it with some other kind of way to go after the appropriate target. That sounded like science fiction 4 or 5 years ago. There is now a clinical trial that just started about 3 months ago at NIH. The first trial of a universal influenza vaccine. I don't know yet how it's going to work, but we're to that point where we're already in clinical trials. And everybody feels like the clock is ticking here, again, because we don't know when that next pandemic might be lurking out there. So we're putting a lot of resources into this. Pain, it has to be on our list here of concerns. I can't tell you how much those of us at NIH have tried to move mountains to put everything we could in terms of the best science to bear on this national tragedy of the opioid crisis. But in the process of trying to figure out what to do about opioids, we have to also think about those 25 million people who have chronic pain every day, for whom we don't really have good solutions. So we have this initiative, and this was supported by the US Congress by $500 million a year being put into our budget starting in fiscal year 18. We call this HEAL, which stands for Helping to End Addiction Long Term. And it aims to both tackle the addiction problem now, to help those roughly 2 million people who are currently addicted to opioids, most of whom started on prescription medicines, but also to come up with non-addictive but highly potent pain medicines for the people who need them. This is a very big task indeed. We are making real progress on this, and just 2 weeks ago, we announced the largest amount of funding for a single program ever in NIH's history, $945 million in research funding, 375 awards in 41 states, including quite a lot here in Massachusetts, to try to do what we could about this. A coordinated effort across sectors. It's got many components. It would take me the rest of this afternoon and this evening to walk you through all the pieces here, but it is all hands on deck. And it is our effort to try to see what we can do to get the kind of evidence in place to know what to do about this terrible, sad situation where more than 70,000 people lost their lives to drug overdoses, most of those opioids. One of the things that we're doing, which might surprise you, is to use the vaccine approach for the opioid crisis. Now, how could that work? Well, after all, your body's pretty good at recognizing foreign substances if you hook them up to something so you can recognize them. So opioids, you know, all the people who have been dying of opioid overdoses, could we in fact provide them with some protection if in fact they could be made immune, particularly to fentanyl, which is the one which has unfortunately killed so many people. So, okay, you've got brain cells. You want to protect the brain cells from actually being touched by the opioid if it's a fentanyl molecule that's going to be too strong and cause that person to stop breathing. So what to do? Without help, that's where the molecules go. Let's make antibodies which bind their target, and let's see what happens if you put those in the blood, and then the opioid appears. Basically, the antibodies bind it so it can't get across the blood-brain barrier, and you should therefore provide protection against a fentanyl overdose. So if somebody was high risk, this might be what you want to do. Sounds like science fiction, already looking pretty good in animal models. Haven't not yet quite gotten to the human application, but we might very well be able to get there. So these kinds of creative strategies, this has got to be every idea you can think of brought to bear on this crisis that's taking so many lives. Number 8, a very exciting field indeed. I heard a lot about this today over at UMass, is the opportunity now for treating cancer to get beyond the traditional 3 modes of therapy, which were surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, and add a 4th one, the immune system. This is based upon work going over many decades by a few people who continued to believe there was something that could work here, whereas most people thought this was going to be a dead end. And in fact, particularly now with the work that was recognized last year by the Nobel Prize on cancer checkpoint inhibitors, and more recently by cell-based treatments, such things as CAR T-cell therapy, this is actually starting to work. I always love to look at this picture. This is Emily Whitehead, who was the first child to receive a treatment for leukemia. She had the usual type of childhood leukemia, which is 95% cured by chemotherapy. She was in the 5% where it didn't work. And she was in desperate circumstances, and her parents signed her up for this first unproven immunotherapy approach, basically taking her immune cells out of the body, teaching them what to go after, taking them to school, if you will, and then reinfusing them back into her body. And after a major battle ensued, basically within about 2 weeks, her leukemia was gone. And that was 6 years ago, and it's still gone. So she's the poster child, if there ever was one. And lots of things happening in this space with immunotherapy to try to figure out how to make it work for everything. Right now, for leukemias, lymphomas, some cases of lung cancer, kidney cancer, melanoma. Jimmy Carter just turned 95. Remember that? He had metastatic melanoma to his brain 4 years ago. He's fine. 95 years old, no evidence of that anymore because of immunotherapy. But it still doesn't work for a lot of solid tumors. Most solid tumors, colon, prostate, breast, pancreas. We need to figure out what can we do to make it work there too. We have another partnership with industry called PACT, which is working really hard on this, and I'm excited to see where that's going. Number 9, we not only want to study illness, we want to study health. We want to figure out how people are resilient, how they manage to maintain health. And this is something which in the past has kind of been a one-size-fits-all approach. But if you really want to understand health, you have to understand individual differences. Well, we have a chance to do that now with the enthusiasm for lots of people in being involved in research, which I've seen growing over the course of the last decade, with electronic health records, so you can actually keep track of what's happening with their medical experiences without piles of paper, with genomics, where you can read out everybody's DNA sequence for an affordable cost, lots of other technologies like wearable sensors to keep track of what's happening. So this is what you would call precision medicine, or precision, in this case, precision wellness. And what we have mounted, the boldest program that NIH has put in place in a very long time, is something called All of Us. So what is that? All of Us, which you can join, and I'll give you the URL here in a minute, aims to enroll 1 million people in the United States. We're up to 326,000 as of October 9th, which I believe was yesterday. You can see the curve here. All of these folks are our partners, and they agree to come on board to share all this information about themselves and to give access to researchers for this overall body of data. All of their personal identifiers are stripped off, but the data is otherwise available for people with good ideas about how to make sense out of it. This is an extremely diverse group. 51% of them are from underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities. They're very diverse in age and geography. Quite a lot of them live in Massachusetts, but a lot of them live in other places too, like Wyoming, because we really want to know what's going on in rural communities and people with lower socioeconomic status. And this is going to be a platform for all kinds of other studies to build upon. So this is an effort to advance prevention, treatment, and care. And again, if you want to join, or at least find out what it means to join, all you got to do is look at joinallofus.org, and there's a process you can go through to get enrolled. The other thing we committed to all these participants, is we give all the data back to you, which has not traditionally been done with studies like this. If you want your complete genome sequence, you can have it. We don't know what it means either, but you can have it. We know what some of it means, but so a lot of this is going to be research information, but if you're interested, you can have it. And there will be a lot of useful information as well. So this is an experiment, but a very significant one. I am thinking that this, when people look back in 50 years, will be one of the most important things that we have done. And finally, that number 10 here is the therapeutics, particularly for rare genetic diseases, which I think has reached a point of dramatic potential. That means I need to tell you about CRISPR, and many of you in the audience know this well and are maybe even using it in your own laboratory. Again, brand new development. Who had heard of CRISPR 5 years ago? I thought it might win the Nobel Prize yesterday for chemistry, but I guess those lithium-ion people beat them out. Wait till next year. So CRISPR is basically developed from studies of bacteria and yogurt. It's an enzyme, Cas is the name of the enzyme, which is, if given a proper RNA guide, goes and searches out in a very complex mixture of DNA, like your genome, a specific spot and does something to it. Can cut it, can change it. It's like find and replace in your word processor, but applied to the genome. And the power of that for those 7,000 genetic diseases where we know the misspelling, but we don't yet have a treatment, should be electrifying as soon as you think about it. And it has already begun to happen in that way. Other gene editing tools and gene therapy vectors are also coming into their own. So I have to give you 2 examples here before I close down. One is this disease, spinal muscular atrophy. This is the most heartbreaking disease that I, as a medical geneticist, occasionally take care of, because these are kids who appear normal at birth, a little floppy, and then over the course of the coming months, they lose more and more of their muscle tone. They basically have ALS, but it's a genetic form and it's an infantile form, and their survival generally is limited to about 1 year, and then they die of suffocation because they can't breathe anymore. It is just heartbreaking to watch this. Now, we know the genetic mistake, it's been figured out, and it affects the motor neurons in the spinal cord so that they degenerate. So could we do something about that? That seemed like a really hard, almost impossible task, but why not try? So investigators basically designed a strategy using a viral vector, AAV, which Terry Flott here at UMass had a lot to do with some of the early developments in that particular vector, stitched into it the gene that these kids are missing, and then gave a very significant dose of that intravenously with the expectation that some of it would find its way to the cells that needed that as a cure. Obviously, they did a lot of animal work before they ever tried this on the first child. But in the first 12 cases, especially for the ones that were treated very early, the results were remarkable. I'm going to show you a video of Mateo. Mateo was treated at 8 weeks of life because he'd had a former sibling who had SMA who died. So the parents knew they were at risk, this is a recessive disease, and got Mateo tested right away. And the protocol had just started. Now remember, this is a disease which these kids never walk, they never sit up, and they're usually dead by age 12 months or so. Mateo in this picture is a little older than that. I get choked up every time I see this. It's just such a dramatic example of what we hoped might happen and now is starting to happen. Yeah, push that button, boy. And now watch this out in the play yard here. That's his dad hanging on the monkey bars. If that doesn't make you feel good about where we're going, I don't know what I can do to show you. And I got to show you one more. When I was postdoc, I worked on sickle cell disease and dreamed of the day where we might someday have a treatment for this disease. People with this disease have about the most agonizing pain you can imagine from sickle cell crises, and while we have one drug, hydroxyurea, it is certainly not a cure. And it's caused by a single misspelled letter in the entire genome, in the beta globin gene on chromosome 11, so it seems like one of those things we ought to be able to do something about. So on the left there is Janelle Stevenson. She signed up for a protocol at NIH in the clinical center where after 22 years of having agonizing pain almost every day, she was ready to try anything. So this meant mobilizing her bone marrow stem cells, taking them out of her body, treating them with the genetic therapy, and then putting her through a very challenging and risky procedure, which was a bone marrow ablation to basically wipe out the untreated bone marrow cells and make room for the ones that had been corrected, we hope, in the viral vector. And so that was a stormy course. She was one of the first 8 patients to go through this. She's not just benefited from this, I think she's cured. She's now 2 years out from this procedure. We continue to refine it, and there are several other protocols running, but the dream of sickle cell finally having something to help these people is coming true. This is, again, just an amazing moment to be able to contemplate how far we have come to get to this point. And now when you imagine those other 7,000 genetic diseases that are still waiting for this kind of treatment, maybe there's hope for them as well. Maybe this is a scalable approach to those rare diseases, because if you can fix a DNA mutation in a targeted way, well, that ought to work for many different applications. So I guess I'm talking in this series of 10 opportunities for 10 years really about turning hope into reality. So I'm fond of this quote which states that. By the way, I wear this little button on my lapel which says hope at NIH, because we often think that the H in NIH is not just about health, it's also about hope. But hope in every sphere of life is a privilege that attaches to action. No action, no hope. Being here in Worcester and being here at your Research Bureau, I can see there's a lot of action intentions and a lot of actions that are being put in place. And so I think you would agree with me. This is a remarkable moment to gather across sectors, bringing all the talent, all the disciplinary expertise together to try to take the potential of hope for people who are still waiting for those advances to happen and bring that into action. And it's a privilege to be here with all of you to talk about that this afternoon. Thank you. A little up against your 6 o'clock hour, but if that's not too precisely a hard stop, I'd be glad to answer some questions for at least a few minutes. And there is a microphone carrier person over there who would be, I'm sure, glad to run to you if you raise your hand and be recognized. So. Questions over here. Well, you must have seen a different person. Oh. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Furman at UMass Medical School, and one of my roles there is to train next generation scientists to prepare them for a wide variety of things they might do to contribute to science and society. And I'm excited to be at this meeting because this Research Bureau is a great example of how research is needed in a lot of different spaces, not just in biomedical research, for example. And NIH yet is training, maybe NIH is the single largest trainer of researchers out there because biomedical sciences is such a prominent field. And so my question is related to how NIH can leverage its resources, and maybe this is a question for the Commerce student as well, to emphasize training more. And I think where a gap that I see in funding is that it takes a little bit of funding but could go a long way in investing in innovations in training and helping our biomedical scientists with all these skills and research think about how they can apply those skills in a wide variety of ways through society. It's
a great question, and something we think about every day. It's certainly true that we are the largest supporter of training for biomedicine. Some of those are through specific training grants that go to the institution or even to the individual student or postdoc. Some of them are because these are trainees that are actually working on a research project and the grant goes to their mentor, but they are supported through that. We are very concerned about making sure that those training experiences are good ones, and so we've added more and more criteria to training grants about what the expectations are about the kinds of experiences that people are going to have. We noticed that many trainees, though, came into the experience of being a graduate student or a postdoc expecting that their course was going to follow that of their mentor. They would basically then go on to a tenure track position in an academic institution, end up as a professor running a research laboratory. And we knew that statistically, that was not the only path. In fact, only about a quarter of graduate students do end up going down that path, and that's been true for quite a long time. And we realized perhaps that students are being a bit misled. They're talked about, well, there are also alternative careers, which made them sound like they were second rate. If you weren't a university professor, well, I guess you didn't quite cut it. That's completely upside down and backwards. So we have now required many of our training grants to offer to their trainees through a program called BEST internships in other kinds of settings, not just the university lab. Go and work a month in a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company. Go and do a month's worth of science policy. Do science journalism. Do more teaching to see if that's something you really find exciting. Go work at the US Congress. God knows we could use lots of scientific input for those members. That's actually a great opportunity and a great need. All of those things, I think, are opening people's eyes. We get so much feedback from trainees about that. That just completely turned my idea upside down about what my vision is for myself. Thank you that I had that chance. We need to do more of that. I take your point. This is one of our most important responsibilities. That is absolutely sure. We're always looking for ways to make it better. Thank you. Other questions? Is this going to be a hard one, Dr. Olson?
So my question relates to bringing people of different disciplines together to solve problems and how NIH might support that. So we've had experience about bringing public and private scientists together, and I think that was effective. But if you think about a problem like we want to stratify patients in a complex disease, instead of calling it lupus, you really have lupus 1, lupus 2, lupus 3, lupus 4. That might require clinicians, drug discoverers, engineers, computer scientists. You know, it would have to be more of a project-based approach where the best ideas might actually come from the collision of different disciplines.
Totally agree.
And yet that's difficult to fund. I've heard there's some articles now about confluence and how NIH doesn't really, and academic institutions don't support confluence because of the silos between departments. And so my question is, particularly based on this futuristic vision, is how might NIH be able to actually support this combination?
So we totally agree with that idea that where a lot of the excitement happens is at these interfaces between disciplines. That's where the sparks fly. That's where things that wouldn't have otherwise come to mind happen. Sometimes it's challenging for those to work because disciplines have different languages and they don't understand each other at first. But then when it starts to click, take the BRAIN initiative, for instance, which I briefly mentioned. The way in which that is happening is these large consortia where over the last year or so, the main leaders that have come into this field are engineers who would not normally have been working on neuroscience, but who have technology ideas. And you put them in a room with a bunch of neuroscientists and really interesting things start to happen. Likewise, some of the projects we're doing in omics, which are now very much driven by computational expertise, as well as other kinds of technology developers. So for large-scale projects where you know you're going to need that, we have a way of putting together what you'd call a cooperative agreement, where you do, in fact, provide an incentive for different disciplines to join up, and you even go out and find them if they didn't know that you needed them. For more direct sort of bottom-up projects where you want to bring investigators together, we have now pushed much more the opportunity to have grant applications with co-principal investigators. And especially love those when they come from different disciplines, because that's going to be a real glue to hold them together. And we have a particular award called the Transformative Research Award, which is specifically designed for interdisciplinary teams, has to have a bold idea, doesn't have to have a lot of preliminary data, can have a budget that's much bigger than an R1 because you're going to have multiple people to support. And that's been very successful, and I think it's still not as widely known as it might be. So I really take your point, because I think when you look at the big events of the last few years, many of them have come about because of those interdisciplinary connections.
One more question. Mike, you've been standing for the whole time.
Yes.
A selfish question. As a father with a son with type 1 diabetes, how would you make on that area?
It's an area of intense research effort, and obviously it needs to be type 1 diabetes. While we certainly have management efforts now that are reasonably good at preserving health, they're far from perfect. The big push, of course, is on the artificial pancreas. Can we create what has been destroyed in kids with type 1 diabetes by the immune system, namely the pancreas that's supposed to be making insulin, create one that does that job? Current versions are pretty much engineering marvels where you have a glucose sensor and an automatic response in terms of insulin. Ideally, though, those could be improved on if they were made up of cells. So the real dream that most of us have is, okay, you've got type 1 diabetes, use that stem cell approach that I mentioned with iPS cells. Take a skin biopsy, convince it to become an iPS cell, then give it the appropriate cocktail to turn that into pancreatic islet. And then blocking the immune system from attacking it, because you got to worry that that would happen again. Put it in a safe place, and then you've got a cure. Is that right around the corner? No, but boy, I would say give it half a decade, and we might be there. The progress is pretty remarkable. So yeah, it's maybe one of the most exciting examples of regenerative medicine that I can think of. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. Absolutely amazing, wonderful presentation. We appreciate it. And again, Congressman McGovern, thank you for arranging this for us. It was really an important presentation and subject matter. I'd like to introduce my friend. Give us 5 more minutes and then the bar will be open, so don't get impatient. 1 5-minute thing. I'd like to introduce my friend and incoming chair of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, Deborah Penta. Deborah has played an active role in our Worcester leadership community for over 30 years, serving on over 12 nonprofit and municipal boards and having served as chairman for 5 of them. She has served as a member of the Research Board for 10 years, has been an executive committee member for 4 years, and has served as vice chair for the past 2 years. Thank you for accepting the role and responsibility as chair of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau for the next 2 years. Deborah?
Thank you very much, Abe. On behalf of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, it is truly a pleasure to invite Brian Thompson, former president and CEO of Commerce Bank, which is now a division of Berkshire Bank, to the stage. The Worcester Regional Research Bureau is pleased to present the Fairman C. Cowan Award to Brian Thompson. Fair Cowan, General Counsel at the Norton Company and of counsel at the law firm of Bowditch & Dewey, was one of the Research Bureau's founders and a role model for engaged citizenship. The Bureau established the Fairman C. Cowan Award to recognize those who, like Fair, committed their time and intellect to improving Worcester. Brian Thompson has been a generous and steadfast supporter of the Research Bureau and our entire Worcester community. Many of us in this room can certainly attest to his long-standing generosity of spirit, time, and financial contributions. Brian, Worcester would not be where it is today without your tireless dedication in helping so many organizations, and we are forever grateful for your support to the Bureau. And now it is our pleasure to present this plaque commemorating the award, and I'm going to show you the plaque, but then I'm going to read what it says. So here is the plaque, and Brian. It reads, "A nonprofit doesn't make money, but it still needs money. This paradox has stymied many a worthy organization, but thanks to the tireless work of Brian Thompson, the Research Bureau has always been financially secure. Over his long and illustrious banking career, Brian has served as a key conduit for the Research Bureau and many other groups, ensuring that funding flowed from those who wanted to give back to those who could use that money in serving our community. Brian himself gave back generously, going beyond financial contributions to give freely of his time, his expertise, and his passion. And we are figuratively in his debt. Please join me in congratulating Brian Thompson. Thank you so much, Brian, for all that you have done for Worcester, for the region, and most especially for the Research Bureau. The Bureau, in closing, would like to express its appreciation once again to our executive committee and board members. And we thank our amazing staff for honoring the best practices and for your diligent work day in and day out, and for all that you do to keep the Bureau strong, relevant, and of value to all sectors of our community. And again, we thank Dr. Collins for traveling to Worcester to highlight the significant work of our nation's medical research agency, sharing results that reach far and wide, turning discoveries into improved health and inspired hope. We thank Congressman McGovern once again for everything you've done to make this happen this evening, and we look forward to the continued advancements that will emerge from Worcester Regional NIH-funded organizations. And now we would like to call Dr. Abraham Haddad to the stage. Dr. Haddad is a friend and outgoing chair of the Research Bureau, and we are really excited to present him with something special. Abe, come here. Okay. So, Abe has been, as all of you know, a tireless advocate, dedicated resource and connector, and he has invested hundreds of hours during his tenure as chairman of the Research Bureau. And it has been a wonderful experience to work with Abe over the past 2 years as his vice chair. His passion, leadership, and commitment to this organization, and his commitment to so many other organizations in the community, is truly unparalleled. There is no doubt that while Abe has passed the torch, that he will continue to immerse himself by helping in any way possible where we may need him here at the Bureau. And now it is our sincere pleasure to present Dr. Haddad with a Research Bureau chair to commemorate his service to the board. Thank you all for joining us today and for your continued critical support of the Bureau's ongoing work to conduct independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of public policy issues to promote informed public debate and decision-making. We are only as effective as the community that embraces our work. We hope you will all stay and socialize and enjoy the wine and hors d'oeuvre reception, but before we do that, we need a motion to dismiss and adjourn. So who would, George, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.